how did the reconciliation process function? And what role did external actors like the European Union have?
Well, I think there were quite a few of initiatives at different levels. There were initiatives also in each of the countries, in the post-Yugoslav countries and Albania, that were started by civil society, by groups who wanted to reach out and see what they're, especially in ex-Yugoslavia, how the people who their parents lived together with for such a long while, what happened there. But of course, the European Union supported lots of those projects. The European Union, different member states, in cooperation with civil society. And so there were even initiatives that that helped a lot to have young people meet. For example, it wasn't really European Union, but sometimes funded also by some parts by European Union. The European Forum Alpbach in Austria, in the Tyrolean mountains, were even already before the wars, yeah, but also especially afterwards, the leaders there invited young people with scholarships from all over the ex-Yugoslav countries and Albania to meet there. And there have been great initiatives, great really people getting to know each other. And so that is one part I would mention. But of course, also when I talk about my experience in the European Parliament, in our reports, not just mine on Kosovo, but also all the others, we always try to also put positive things that happen there, not only the critical ones, which we also had, but really to see where are things moving on, where do people take initiatives to really leave the past behind and focus on what a modern, also liberal-minded state will need.
Thank you. Now let us turn a bit to the culture. How does cultural literature and art affect the reconciliation process, maybe from your experience in Kosovo?
Well, culture, be it literature, music, visual arts, theater, whatever, always can have or usually has an important effect. So that is also why I find things like the DocuFest, which is this big documentary film festival in Brisbane, in Kosovo, a very important initiative. I've been there, I think, twice, and I want to go again because it's something where people, mostly young people, but also olders, come together from all over Europe, the Balkans and many other parts, really to enjoy what the documentary films they show there and things like that. Or also when you read literature from other countries, yeah, I mean, except the ones who speak Albanian, all the others, they can read each other's languages. Yeah, so this is something where I think culture and literature, music, etc., can have and should have a very positive impact, and I think it can be used a lot more than it still is. Of course, also art and exhibitions of things can also draw the importance to something that is discussed at the political level. For example, in Kosovo, a women's initiative made a beautiful, very impressive exhibition, putting women's clothes on washing lines, showing the problem of violence against women and also rape in war by women. Yeah. And also war rape, yeah, done on women. So using visual arts, using music and literature can pull attention of people, which touches you not just at a language, let's see, point, but it touches you in your soul, in your heart, and you can then, I think, learn a lot if you are willing to do that. So that is why culture, literature, all of that is very important also in a reconciliation process.
Nationalism is pretty present in the Western Balkans still, as you mentioned also in the first three questions. So how would you comment, how does nationalistic history teaching affect the reconciliation process today?
This, of course, and I mean, this is not just in the Western Balkans. I come from Austria, a country that has taken a long time to deal with the National Socialist, the Nazi part. It took also around like 30, 40 years until there was really public debates about what our own and our fathers, mothers, and grandparents' role in that was, in the horrible, dramatic part of National Socialism regime, dictatorship. So I know how long it takes. That's why history, looking about what happened when, and looking at what the different views are, who sees which part of history in which way. And there's a great initiative which really tried to teach the different views of how history worked. It was done by the Center for Democracy and Reconciliation in Southeastern Europe, CDR-SEE, and it did several sort of historic areas looking at the different views that people had on certain events. Yeah. And this I find so important, because then you learn why do the others always say this was our victory, whereas we say this was ours? Like just one example. So this I find very important, and I think this should happen in the Western Balkans, in Europe, everywhere. We still need to teach young people, and also the older generation, about what happened in history. And if there are different views, then look at the different views and discuss about it. Without that, I think the future always depends on what happened in the past. Of course, we have to look forward, but without knowing that, we are in danger of falling into the same traps that our grandfathers and grandmothers did.
The joint history teaching project by the Center for Democracy and Reconciliation in Southeast Europe you mentioned functioned pretty well until 2018 or 19, when the funds were cut short and the work had to be stagnated. So how do you comment on that? Is this a setback?
Yes, of course. I mean, these things need to continue. There needs to be money for that. If we know, and there's also criticism I have on parts of the EU. Yeah, why don't we fund, the EU, and also member states, fund more on it? But why? And not just why, but also education ministries in the Western Balkans, they should focus more on that. Education is such an essential part of human life. And without good education, without knowing and learning in your youth already, overcoming like these dangers of nationalist thinking, of thinking only in your own ethnic group. This is something of the 19th century. We should really learn to overcome that. That's what the success story of the European Union is. When France and Germany decided, and some big men and women behind them decided in the 1950s, we will not let happen what happened in the Second World War again. We will cooperate. Cooperation instead of confrontation. That is one of the principles that we learned in the European Union. Even though it doesn't work, all of it, I know. But this principle that you cooperate and that you're taught also how to do that. This is a technique that humans have or can learn. And not just if you don't like what somebody else says, going against that person. This happens in schools already. So learning how to deal with conflicts and with criticism is one of the most important things that education should do.
You mentioned the several ministries also in the Western Balkans of education who also have to invest into funds and create new opportunities for several projects or initiatives about reconciliation. So maybe let's turn a bit to the domestic politics. How do you see domestic politics influence in this reconciliation process today in the Western Balkans?
They have a huge responsibility on that. And what I see is in many cases not that, that doesn't make me that optimistic that this process is really being supported by all of them. When I see that many of the leaders at this time are going towards rather authoritarian tendencies, they do not like criticism. I mean, for me, I was a politician for 25 years, and I know criticism is not something you like. But if you don't like that, don't go into politics, because criticism for me is the salt of democracy. Without that, democracies can't thrive. And we see that in, unfortunately, many of the governments we have. Cracking down on media that should be independent. Media, yes, that have the task of being critical, but also civil society. This is an essence of democracy. Because when we see that there are influences from countries outside of the Western Balkans, let's name Russia, for example, but also inside the EU, Hungary, Poland, the governments there are not, they don't like freedom of the media. They don't like freedom of civil society organizations. So, and if their influence grows and leaders in the Western Balkans, also now China is getting more influential there as well, economically speaking, that is really something tremendously important for democracies. And leaders really should look towards the importance of thriving democracies in the sense of supporting critical opinions, yeah, learning about that, not being afraid of saying, well, that's a different opinion, that's okay. So I find it important that there are new leaders, especially those who do not come from the war generation anymore. I mean, the most recent example for me is Vjosa Osmani, the new president of Kosovo, who I really feel she's, for me, and I hope she will do that. I know her quite well. So I think she is one of those who can really put a focus on these important things in democracy, yeah, that this is not a way no country should be going to its very authoritarian lines, but really looking into diversity of opinions and of people in our societies.
Thank you very much. So let us turn a bit to the end of the interview. I want to ask you about the future, because I think it's important to think about the future, not only to think about and to talk about the past, which we certainly did not do in this interview. But still, what do you expect from the future, and can one expect more involvement from the European Union in the Western Balkans, considering reconciliation?
Well, here I think my answer is not as optimistic as I would like it to be. My expectations, unfortunately, are not as high as I think they would be necessary to do. So my hope, and you know, hope is the thing that dies at the last moment. So yes, I do hope, and I think there's many people who struggle and fight for that inside the EU, but also in the Western Balkans, that the European Union takes the 6 Western Balkan countries that are not yet members of the EU as an important part of our European continent, meaning that the process also of enlargement, which is not liked by many leaders inside the EU, by the European Commission, yes, and by the European Parliament, but not in the Council. And we know the Council and member states' governments still have a very important role in the EU. So I think the importance is really to push from different sides that the European Union and member states' governments really involve themselves more. There's lots of money paid, yeah, but the question is where to and how it is used, but also politically support those who want diverse, open-minded, liberal, in the very broad sense, human rights-oriented societies. And this means, as we have said, looking into reconciliation, but not only. So I do hope that there will be more importance taken in the future by European leaders about the Western Balkans, because if we look at the map, it is very clear this is part of our continent. Yeah, it's surrounded by all EU member states. So let's move on. The Western Balkan countries need to be included. Citizens have to become part of the European Union sooner than later, I would hope. But I know this is a long process, but I also know there's lots of people who still struggle for that. And this struggle needs to continue to convince them.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, does the past impact the now? And did the people and the politicians overcome the past in the Western Balkans, your opinion?
No, not yet. Especially when you look at this, what we mentioned already in the interview, this rising nationalism and fundamentalism and sort of the idea, like this I don't even want to mention it, but I will, these land swap ideas, yeah, sort of looking into, you want to have a country that's ethnically pure. I mean, what ridiculous concept is that in the 21st century? This is outrageous, I find it. So the past still influences, and that is, and I want to end with a positive note. I think that is what so many young people also, why they like the European Union, yeah? Because that is what we achieved in the EU. We do not and make it sort of a very sort of say strong statement. We do not kill each other anymore. We have other problems, yeah, but we try to resolve them by dialogue, by communicating, by trying to finding solutions. That's what I learned in the European Parliament as a politician, more than in the national parliament in Austria. You cooperate with people who don't have your same opinion, but you need to find a solution. So go ahead with that. That's for me also the concept for the Western Balkans and for the European Union, together with the Western Balkan states and citizens.
Thank you very much for this rather interesting interview that we had.
Okay, thank you very much as well.